When I walked toward the glass conference room that Friday afternoon, I already understood what it meant. There was no meeting invite, no agenda, just a short message from Human Resources asking whether I was available for a quick conversation. 19 years of experience had taught me exactly what that phrasing was designed to hide. Ross Bexley, Chief Financial Officer, was already seated when I arrived. Immaculate suit, relaxed posture. 2 documents lay on the table, squared perfectly, as if symmetry could disguise intent. Ross didn't waste time. He looked straight at me and said, "We've decided to end your employment today. The company isn't investing another dollar in people who should have moved on years ago." The words landed cleanly, practiced, final. Ross maintained his cold expression, just like the current weather. It was freezing. And I wonder, what's the temperature where you are if you're still here with me? Please share your lucky number with me. I had spent 19 years as Senior Director of Operations, holding systems together through audits, mergers, and failures no one ever saw because I absorbed them first. I didn't manage for visibility. I managed risk. Ross Bexley had never managed a crisis. He managed spreadsheets. His authority came from forecasts, not consequences. He pushed the papers toward me. 1 resignation letter, 1 termination notice. Sign whichever you prefer. He added, "Either way, this ends now." The room waited. For anger, for protest, for something emotional enough to justify what they were doing. I gave them none. I read every line slowly. HR avoided my eyes. Ross mistook my silence for surrender. "I'll resign," I said. Relief flashed across his face, quick and unguarded. Then I looked up and finished the sentence. "But I'll write my own letter." That was the moment his certainty cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but enough to change everything that followed. Before we continue, I'd like to pause for a moment. What you're about to hear is a fictional story, built on real professional experiences and situations, with some elements created using artificial intelligence to bring the story to life. I hope it leaves a lasting impression and gives you an engaging experience. And if you're feeling tired, please take some time to rest and take care of your health. After I left the glass conference room, the weight didn't lift, it sharpened. 19 years were being compressed into a narrative I no longer recognized, and the injustice didn't arrive all at once. It escalated. I remembered the audit that should have shut us down, the one I salvaged by rebuilding controls overnight. I remembered the lawsuit that vanished because I found an email no one else knew existed. I remembered clients ready to walk, then staying because I spoke their language when executives couldn't. Those victories were quiet, invisible, and suddenly inconvenient. Ross Bexley dismissed all of it as outdated thinking. He said it more than once, usually in meetings where he smiled while doing it. Experience, to him, was a liability that cost too much. He reassigned my core responsibilities to a junior manager half my age, paid less than half my salary, then praised the move as efficiency. Watching my own work handed over like surplus inventory burned more than the ultimatum itself. The company didn't just erase my role. It rewrote history in under 30 minutes. What Ross never understood was that I saw this coming long before Friday and prepared a single sentence carefully early. I returned to the conference room an hour later, carrying a single sheet of paper, no folder, no explanation, just 1 page, folded once, held between my fingers with deliberate calm. Whatever tension remained in the room belonged to them, not me. Ross Bexley looked up as I placed the paper in front of him. "That was fast," he said, amused. "It didn't take long," I replied. The letter contained 1 sentence, 42 words, no emotion, no accusation, no defense. I didn't justify myself because justification invites debate. And I wasn't there to debate. I was there to conclude. Ross skimmed the page, barely slowing at the end. He smiled. A small, satisfied curve that assumed victory. "All right," he said. "We'll process this immediately." Human Resources reached for the document. "Effective today," she confirmed, already making notes. Her tone suggested efficiency. not consequence. Ross signed without hesitation. The pen moved smoothly, confidently, as if he were approving a routine expense. "I appreciate you being professional about this," he added. "It makes things easier." Easier for him. I thought, not safer. The silence in the room wasn't tense. It was procedural, the kind that follows paperwork, not conflict. HR gathered the documents, stood, and said, "We'll deactivate access shortly and send your final details by email." I nodded once. Of course. They didn't ask questions. They didn't reread the sentence. No one paused to consider why a 19-year executive would resign with a single line and no discussion. They saw compliance and stopped thinking. As I stood to leave, Ross leaned back, satisfied. This was the right decision. He said, "For everyone." I met his eyes and said nothing. Control doesn't announce itself. It waits. What they missed was simple. The resignation was not unconditional. It was effective upon something else. A trigger, a contingency, a pause built into plain language. By accepting it as written, they didn't end my employment. They suspended it. And they wouldn't realize that until the phone started ringing. And the room that felt so quiet learned how loud one sentence could become. The phone rang at 6 in the morning, sharp and insistent, cutting through the quiet I had earned. I didn't rush to answer. I already knew who it would be. Silence, used correctly, forces the other side to speak first. "This is Jonathan Hale, corporate counsel for the company," the voice said the moment I picked up. His calm was artificial, stretched thin. "We need to discuss your resignation letter immediately." I smiled and sat down. "Of course," I said. "What seems to be the problem?" There was a pause. "Papers shifting. The language you used is unclear," he admitted. "Specifically, the phrase effective upon receipt of complete settlement. We need clarification." I spoke slowly, carefully. "There's nothing unclear. My resignation becomes effective only after I receive full payment of everything owed to me under my employment agreement and applicable law." "That's not how resignations work," he said. "Too quickly. It is when they're written that way." I replied, "Until that condition is met, I'm still employed." The line went silent. I could hear him breathing, recalculating. "You're saying you haven't actually resigned." "I'm saying you accepted exactly what I submitted." I said, "Nothing more, nothing less." He tried again. "Our position is that your employment ended when Mr. Bexley signed. Ross Bexley signed without reading." I answered, "That's not my responsibility." Another pause. Longer this time. "Then what do you believe you're owed?" he asked. "Everything," I said evenly. "Salary, accrued benefits, contractual compensation. Until it's settled in full, the meter keeps running." That was the moment the balance shifted. What Ross had framed as closure became exposure. Every hour delayed now had a price. Every day extended my status, my protections, my leverage. "I'll need to discuss this internally," the lawyer said. "I'm sure you will." I replied, "Take your time. I'm still on payroll." When the call ended, the morning felt different. Somewhere, Ross Bexley was discovering that the cost he thought he'd eliminated had just started accruing interest, and it would keep climbing until someone admitted they had misread a single sentence. Quietly, relentlessly, without my involvement. If you agree with how I handled that call, staying calm, using the contract, and letting the law speak for itself, please leave a 1 in the comments. Because every opinion matters. And your perspective helps me realize I'm on the right track. By the next afternoon, denial replaced confidence. Ross Bexley called first. Not the lawyers. His voice was sharp, hurried, already defensive. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said. "There's no bonus owed, no equity triggered, no additional compensation." I let him talk. Panic reveals itself in repetition. He insisted the restructuring reset everything, that my role had ended cleanly, that stock options were discretionary, that bonuses were performance-based. Said with emphasis, as if volume could erase language. Each claim ignored the same mistake: my contract still existed. I opened the document and read calmly. Section 4.2. I said, Change of control protection. Bonus payable upon termination or resignation for good reason. I paused. That applies here, Ross scoffed. That clause is outdated. It was reaffirmed 3 years ago. I replied, You signed the amendment. Silence, then resistance. Equity doesn't vest automatically. Section 6. I continued. Immediate vesting upon restructuring that materially alters reporting lines. I let the words settle. You reassigned my responsibilities publicly. His breathing grew louder. That doesn't mean anything. It means everything. I said, and you know it. He tried one last angle. We'll contest this. That's your right. I answered, so is mine, after the call. His denial followed me into writing. An internal email surfaced within hours, forwarded quietly by someone who still trusted me. Ross had written it weeks earlier, casually, confidently. He referred to me as an aging cost center and suggested replacing me with younger, cheaper talent to stabilize margins. Reading it didn't hurt, it clarified. That message explained the rush. The ultimatum, the careless signature. Ross hadn't miscalculated the law. He had dismissed me. And now every spreadsheet he trusted was collapsing under a variable he'd ignored documentation. By evening, the narrative had changed. This wasn't about refusing to pay. It was about damage control. And Ross Bexley, who believed numbers obeyed him, was discovering that contracts remember everything. The panic wasn't loud yet, but it was spreading, line by line, email by email, until denial became liability and silence became evidence inside the company walls. Threats arrived the next morning, neatly packaged as professionalism. A letter from outside counsel warned of litigation, reputational harm, and consequences if I continued what they called interference. The language was aggressive, polished, designed to intimidate rather than persuade. It confirmed one thing: calm explanations had failed. I joined the call they requested, 3 voices on the line, all speaking carefully. Your position is unfounded. One attorney said, If you persist, the company will pursue claims against you. I didn't interrupt. I waited until the end. You're welcome to file, I said. Discovery will be very interesting. The silence that followed was immediate. Someone cleared a throat. Another voice tried a different approach. This doesn't need to become adversarial. It already is. I replied, You just didn't notice when it changed sides. They warned me about costs, about time, about stress. They said courts favor employers. They suggested I reconsider while I still could. Each sentence assumed fear. None acknowledged the documents I held. I answered with facts. You forced a resignation. You accepted conditional language. You reassigned my role publicly. Those are your records, not my allegations. Ross Bexley finally spoke, his voice tight. You're overplaying this, I smiled. You underread it. When the call ended. I didn't wait. That afternoon, I filed a formal labor complaint citing constructive dismissal and retaliation. The process was procedural, unemotional, irreversible. Timelines activated, notices issued, preservation obligations triggered. By evening, the tone shifted again. Emails became cautious, calls went unanswered. The threat of a countersuit faded into strategy meetings and legal holds. What they had framed as leverage collapsed under scrutiny. This wasn't escalation, it was response. They had pushed until resistance became necessary, then panicked when resistance arrived prepared. The confrontation was no longer theoretical, it was on record, time-stamped, and moving forward without their permission. I knew then the fight had crossed a legal threshold. From that moment forward, nothing could be quietly undone, bargained away, or buried by management. The system was engaged, and it moves slower than fear. But it never forgets once formal procedures begin inside institutions. Each day that passed without resolution carried a measurable cost. Payroll continued. Benefits remained active. Legal fees stacked quietly in the background. Vendors began asking questions. Internal meetings multiplied. What Ross Bexley had framed as a quick removal turned into an ongoing liability that refused to disappear. I didn't call, I didn't push. I let time do what pressure couldn't. From people still inside the company, fragments reached me. Ross was being summoned repeatedly by the board. Emergency sessions replaced routine updates. Forecasts were revised, then revised again. The narrative shifted from confidence to containment. Executives don't panic loudly. They panic in schedules, in calendar blocks labeled urgent, in meetings that start early and end late. Ross's authority thinned with each one. He tried to regain control by explaining. He blamed legal ambiguity. He blamed process delays. He blamed me. But the numbers no longer supported him. Every day of inaction extended my status, my protections, and their exposure. The silence he expected from me was working against him. Then the email surfaced. It was forwarded without commentary, as if the sender didn't need to explain its weight. Written weeks before my termination, Ross described me as an aging cost center and recommended accelerating my exit to stabilize margins before year-end. No performance concerns, no restructuring language, just intent. Reading it, I felt nothing sharp, only clarity. That email connected everything: the rushed ultimatum, the careless signature, the refusal to negotiate. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decision made early and disguised late. And now it was documented. By the time Ross realized the message had escaped its intended audience, it was too late. Preservation notices had already been issued. Deletions were no longer permitted. What he had written casually now carried legal weight. I didn't need to respond. The system was doing it for me. The satisfaction wasn't loud. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like watching gravity take effect after someone stepped too close to the edge. Convinced rules wouldn't apply to them. Every day of silence increased the cost, narrowed Ross's options, and made one outcome inevitable quietly, predictably, and without my intervention. By the time the call came, I was expecting it, but not the tone. The lawyer spoke carefully, every word padded with restraint. "We'd like to explore an amicable resolution," he said, as if the previous weeks hadn't been anything but hostile. I listened without interrupting. The offer followed, framed as generosity, a lump sum, a release. Silence on both sides. It was designed to end discomfort, not to correct wrongdoing. "That number doesn't match the contract," I replied calmly. "It doesn't match the law either." He adjusted quickly. "We're trying to be reasonable, so am I," I said. "Reasonable is paying exactly what's owed. Nothing more, nothing less." I named the figure, precise to the dollar, supported by clauses they already possessed. Salary continuation, accrued benefits, compensation triggered by restructuring. Each item had a reference, a paragraph, a signature they could not deny. I wasn't negotiating emotion, I was enforcing math. Silence returned. "Heavier this time. That's significantly higher than we anticipated," he said. "Then you anticipated incorrectly," I answered. "Your documents, not mine, created that outcome." He asked for time. I gave it. Because control doesn't rush. When he returned, his voice had changed. The offer moved closer, but still fell short. "I'm not countering," I said. "I'm restating." Another pause. Then something shifted. "Ross Bexley will no longer be handling this matter," the lawyer said. "Authority has been reassigned." I closed my eyes. Briefly, that explained the sudden professionalism. "So we're aligned now," I said. "Good." The final number landed exactly where it should have from the beginning. I agreed. Conditional on documentation and timelines. No celebration, no victory speech, just structure. When the call ended, I understood the win wasn't in the amount. It was in the transfer of control. Ross had lost the privilege of improvisation. Decisions were no longer driven by ego or spreadsheets, but by exposure. I didn't smile. Satisfaction, when it's earned properly, doesn't need an audience. It just settles in, quiet and complete. As leverage becomes resolution, It felt less like revenge than correction, a careful reset where rules reasserted themselves, and where I chose precision over anger, patience over noise, and outcome over spectacle, without ever raising my voice once. When the agreement arrived, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt inevitable. Pages of legal language, clean and careful, acknowledging obligations the company had tried to deny for weeks. Every number matched what I had stated from the beginning. Salary continuation, accrued benefits, compensation triggered by restructuring. They had finally stopped arguing with the contract. The acceptance came without celebration. A short call, a restrained voice. "We're prepared to settle in full," the lawyer said. No bargaining left, no warnings, just confirmation. I reviewed everything slowly. Control doesn't mean speed, it means certainty. When I signed, it wasn't relief I felt, it was alignment. The system had corrected itself. One condition remained non-negotiable. "I need a formal letter of recommendation," I said, not generic, not delegated, signed by senior leadership. There was a pause, then agreement. The letter arrived the next morning, printed on company letterhead, precise and flattering in a way only lawyers approve. It praised my professionalism, my leadership, my contributions over 19 years. Every sentence was accurate. Every word was required. Ross Bexley's name was nowhere on it. Instead, the signature belonged to someone higher, someone who understood what this had cost. That absence said more than any apology could. The final detail was timing. Human Resources sent a proposed effective date for my resignation. Already entered into their system, I corrected it. "No," I replied. "The resignation becomes effective on the date I receive full settlement." They adjusted it without protest. That distinction mattered. It always had. Ross thought he had ended my employment the moment he pushed those papers across the table. He never understood that authority doesn't come from gestures. It comes from conditions being met. When the funds cleared, I chose the date. Quietly, precisely, on my terms. The justice wasn't symbolic. It was documented, enforceable, complete. I didn't walk away diminished or erased. I left exactly as the contract allowed, with my record intact and the timeline restored to me. That was the final correction, and it was mine to make. Nothing followed except silence, closure, and a balance that finally made sense. Consequences took longer than the wire transfer, but they arrived all the same. A few quarters later, Ross Bexley was gone, removed quietly after missed targets and explanations that no longer convinced anyone. No announcement, no farewell email, just another name erased from the org chart he once controlled. I moved on differently. Consulting replaced employment. Companies called because they needed stability, not slogans. I chose my projects, set my rates, and worked without pretending loyalty was something owed upward. Experience, it turned out, still had a market. Occasionally, someone would ask if it felt like revenge. I always answered honestly. There was no anger left to satisfy. What happened wasn't personal, and it wasn't emotional. It was procedural. That distinction mattered more than money, titles, or apologies ever could. From them all involved there, I didn't take revenge. I would say, I simply let Ross fix his own mistakes. I didn't walk away feeling victorious. I walked away clear. What stayed with me wasn't the money or the outcome, but the moment I realized dignity doesn't require permission. It requires preparation, restraint, and the courage to stay calm when someone expects you to break. If you ever find yourself cornered like that, I hope you pause before reacting. Ask what you truly control. Not the meeting, not the titles, not the tone. Only your response, your records, and the choices you make when no one is watching. Power rarely announces itself. It waits. I don't tell this story to encourage revenge. I tell it to remind you that silence can be ethical, boundaries can be firm, and standing up for yourself doesn't have to be loud to be effective. Sometimes the strongest move is refusing to be rushed into surrender. If this story made you think differently about your own situation, take a moment and ask yourself what you would do if the pressure were on you. What would you protect? What would you document? What would you refuse to sign? And if you believe stories like this matter, consider helping it reach someone who needs it. One subscription helps this message travel further. One like tells the algorithm this conversation deserves space. One share might give someone the confidence to pause, breathe, and choose wisely. If you're still here, thank you. You're not just listening, you're helping others remember they have options. That matters more than you realize. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.